For centuries, the legend of Jamaica's buried gold has captivated adventurers and dreamers alike. But what if those whispers aren't just myths? What if there's solid evidence, historical accounts, and local legends pointing to an unimaginable treasure waiting to be found? This video will take you on an exhilarating quest to uncover whether Jamaica's hidden riches are fact or fiction. Before we dive into this mystery, if you're fascinated by hidden treasures and untold stories, hit that subscribe button. We're on a journey to 10,000 subscribers, and your support helps us uncover more incredible mysteries like this one. Now, close your eyes for just a moment and imagine this. Somewhere beneath the Caribbean sun, under layers of volcanic soil and centuries of forgotten time, there might be chests overflowing with Spanish doubloons. Gold coins stamped with the faces of long-dead kings, jewels that once adorned the necks of colonial governors, and perhaps, just perhaps, the personal fortune of one of history's most notorious pirates, buried in haste and never recovered. Is this fantasy? Or could Jamaica truly be hiding secrets that would make even the most skeptical treasure hunter pause? The answer is far more complex and far more intriguing than you might think. Jamaica. The name alone conjures images of pristine beaches, turquoise waters, and swaying palm trees. But beneath this paradise lies a history steeped in violence, wealth, and mystery. To understand why the legend of buried gold persists, we need to travel back to a time when this island was one of the most dangerous and prosperous places on Earth. In the late 1600s, Jamaica wasn't the peaceful tourist destination it is today. It was a strategic jewel in the Caribbean, sitting at the crossroads of Spanish treasure fleets returning from the New World. Ships laden with Aztec and Incan gold, silver from Potosi, emeralds from Colombia, all of it had to pass through these waters on the way back to Spain. And where there's treasure in transit, there are those willing to take it by force. Enter the pirates, or as they preferred to be called, privateers. The English, having seized Jamaica from Spain in 1655, quickly realized the island's potential. They needed protection from Spanish retaliation. And what better way to defend than to employ the very men who made the Caribbean a nightmare for Spanish ships? Port Royal, a small settlement on Jamaica's southeastern coast, became the unofficial headquarters of Caribbean piracy. Within years, it transformed into something unprecedented. They called it the wickedest city on Earth, and they weren't exaggerating. At its peak, Port Royal housed over 8,000 people crammed into a space barely a mile long. But these weren't ordinary citizens. They were pirates, prostitutes, merchants, slaves, and adventurers all thrown together in a chaotic stew of wealth and debauchery. Taverns outnumbered churches 20-1. Gold flowed through the streets like water. A single successful raid could make a pirate wealthier than most European noblemen, and they spent their fortunes as quickly as they earned them. One eyewitness described Port Royal as a place where men drank rum by the barrel, gambled away fortunes in a single night, and engaged in acts so scandalous that even sailors blushed at the retelling. The wealth concentrated in this tiny city was staggering. Some historians estimate that at any given time, there were millions of pounds worth of gold, silver, and precious gems circulating through Port Royal's economy. But here's where the legend begins to take shape. Not all of that wealth was spent. Some of it, perhaps a great deal of it, was hidden. And the man at the center of Jamaica's greatest treasure mystery, a Welsh privateer who became both a knight and a legend. His name was Henry Morgan. Now, if you've heard of Henry Morgan, you might know him as the face on a rum bottle. But the real Henry Morgan was far more fascinating and far more dangerous than any marketing campaign could capture. He wasn't just a pirate. He was a brilliant military tactician, a ruthless commander, and eventually the lieutenant governor of Jamaica. Morgan's exploits read like something from a Hollywood screenplay. He sacked the city of Portobelo in Panama, torturing citizens to reveal hidden treasure. He captured and ransomed entire cities. His raid on Panama City in 1671 was so successful and so brutal that the Spanish Empire demanded his arrest. Instead, King Charles II knighted him and made him governor of the very island he'd used as a base for his raids. Think about that for a moment. A man who spent his life stealing Spanish gold was rewarded with power, prestige, and protection. The pirate became a politician. The thief became a knight. But here's the question that haunts treasure hunters to this day. What happened to Morgan's fortune? He lived well, certainly. He owned plantations, slaves, and property throughout Jamaica. But accounts from his contemporaries suggest he accumulated far more wealth than he ever publicly displayed. Some claim he had hidden caches scattered across the island, insurance policies against political winds that could turn at any moment. Morgan died in 1688, at the age of 53, reportedly from liver disease brought on by years of heavy drinking. He was buried with full military honors in the Palisados Cemetery, a final recognition of his status as a respected member of Jamaican society. But Morgan's story doesn't end with his death. In fact, this is where it becomes truly mysterious. 4 years later, on June 7, 1692, at approximately 11:43 in the morning, Jamaica experienced one of the most catastrophic earthquakes in recorded history. The ground didn't just shake, it liquefied. In a phenomenon known as liquefaction, the sandy soil beneath Port Royal turned to quicksand. Buildings that had stood for decades sank in seconds. The earth opened up and swallowed entire streets. Eyewitnesses reported seeing people sucked into the ground up to their necks, buried alive as the earth reclaimed the wickedest city on earth. Within minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal slid into the sea. Over 2,000 people died immediately. Another 3,000 perished in the days that followed from injuries and disease. The epicenter of Caribbean piracy, the city that had accumulated more wealth per capita than almost anywhere on earth, was gone, and with it went countless fortunes, including Henry Morgan's grave. The Palisados Cemetery, where Morgan was buried, now sits 5 fathoms deep beneath the Caribbean Sea. His bones, his coffin, and perhaps anything buried with him, lie somewhere in the underwater ruins of Port Royal. The irony is almost poetic. The man who spent his life taking Spanish gold ended up buried with it, both lost to the same watery grave. But here's where the legend takes on new dimensions. In the chaos before the earthquake, did anyone know what was coming? Did pirates and merchants, sensing something wrong, hastily bury their most valuable possessions? Did Morgan's family, aware of hidden caches, try to secure them before disaster struck? We know that earthquakes can be preceded by warning signs, animals behaving strangely, minor tremors, changes in well water levels. If some of Port Royal's inhabitants had even a few hours of warning, what would they have done with their fortunes? The most logical answer: they would have buried them. And that's exactly what local legends claim happened. For generations, Jamaicans have passed down stories of buried treasure. Tales of pirates who fled Port Royal before the earthquake, carrying chests of gold into the island's interior. Stories of Spanish prisoners who, forced to reveal the locations of hidden caches, took their secrets to watery graves. Whispers of maps drawn on weathered parchment, tucked into bottles or carved into cave walls. One particularly persistent legend speaks of a massive treasure buried in the Cockpit Country, a rugged, nearly impenetrable region in Jamaica's interior. The story goes that a group of pirates, forewarned of approaching danger, transported their combined wealth far from Port Royal and hid it in a limestone cave. They marked the location using natural landmarks, stars, and cryptic clues, but they never returned to claim it. Why? Because they were among the thousands who died when Port Royal collapsed into the sea. Another tale centers on the Hellshire Hills, a remote area south of Kingston. According to local tradition, Henry Morgan himself maintained a secret cache there, a retirement fund known only to his most trusted associates. After his death, his widow supposedly attempted to retrieve it, but was driven back by supernatural forces. The locals called it Morgan's Curse, a protective spell placed on the treasure to prevent anyone but its rightful owner from claiming it. Now, you might be thinking these sound like typical pirate legends, the kind of romantic nonsense that gets embellished with each retelling. And you'd have good reason to be skeptical. But here's what makes Jamaica's treasure legends different from most. There's a documented historical basis for enormous wealth being present on the island, and there's a cataclysmic event that could have buried it. This isn't a vague story about pirates hiding treasure somewhere maybe. This is a historical fact. Port Royal contained vast wealth, and that wealth disappeared almost overnight when the city sank. The question isn't whether treasure existed. It's whether any of it survived and where it might be hidden. In 1959, a team led by famed marine archaeologist Edwin Link conducted the first major expedition to excavate underwater Port Royal. What they found was astonishing. Intact buildings, perfectly preserved artifacts, and yes, gold. Not a pirate hoard, but enough coins, jewelry, and precious metals to confirm that the sunken city was essentially a time capsule of late 17th century wealth. Link's expedition recovered pewter plates, wine bottles, smoking pipes, and several gold coins. But they also discovered something else. Evidence that people had attempted to salvage valuables immediately after the earthquake. Disturbed areas in the ruins suggested that survivors or early treasure hunters had already combed through the wreckage, taking whatever they could reach. This raises a tantalizing question. If people were salvaging in the immediate aftermath, what did they do with what they found? Some surely sold it or used it to rebuild their lives. But others, especially those who recovered more than they could safely explain possessing, might have hidden it again, planning to return later, and some never did. In the centuries since, dozens of expeditions have searched for Jamaica's buried gold. Some were official archaeological surveys. Others were treasure hunters armed with metal detectors, old maps, and determination. A few have found suggestive evidence: old coins in unexpected places, fragments of jewelry in remote caves, Spanish artifacts far from known Spanish settlements. But no one has found the big one, the legendary pirate hoard, the cache that would rewrite history books and make headlines around the world. Does that mean it doesn't exist? Not necessarily. Jamaica's terrain is incredibly challenging for treasure hunters. Dense jungles, limestone formations riddled with caves, and areas so remote that they've barely been mapped. If someone in 1692 wanted to hide treasure where it would never be found, they had plenty of options. There's also the legal reality. In Jamaica, any significant archaeological find belongs to the government. Treasure hunting without proper permits is illegal, and the penalties are severe. This discourages organized searches, but probably encourages something potentially more interesting: local knowledge passed down through families. And this is where the modern chapter of the story begins. Today, there are still people actively searching for Jamaica's buried gold. Not large expeditions with corporate backing, but individuals driven by family stories, research, or intuition. Online communities like TreasureNet feature threads about Jamaican treasure that stretch back years, with users sharing theories, analyzing historical documents, and occasionally posting photos of intriguing finds. One particularly dedicated researcher, whose identity remains private for legal reasons, claims to have spent over 20 years following a trail of clues left in an 18th century diary. According to this individual, the diary contains encrypted references to a location in the Blue Mountains where several pirates pooled their wealth before the earthquake. They've conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys, analyzed soil samples, and mapped cave systems, all while carefully avoiding the attention of authorities. Have they found anything? They claim to have found markers, carved stones, anomalous metal readings, and what they believe are intentional landmarks. But no actual treasure. Not yet. Another group, operating under the guise of historical research, has focused on the underwater ruins of Port Royal. They argue that the most logical place to find treasure isn't in some remote jungle cave, but literally under the feet of the original city. Modern sonar technology has revealed structures and objects beneath the sediment that have never been excavated. Could Henry Morgan's grave, and whatever was buried with it, still be intact down there? The Jamaican government, for its part, has shown increasing interest in Port Royal as both a tourist attraction and an archaeological site. There's talk of establishing an underwater museum, allowing divers to explore the ruins while preserving them for future study. If this happens, who knows what might finally come to light? But perhaps the most interesting modern development comes from an unexpected source: genetics and genealogy. Several families in Jamaica claim direct descent from Henry Morgan through illegitimate children. While historical records show Morgan was childless in his legitimate marriage, rumors of secret offspring have persisted for centuries. Some of these families claim to possess inherited knowledge, cryptic clues, partial maps, or simply oral traditions about where Morgan hid portions of his wealth. Are these claims credible? It's impossible to say without evidence, but the mere fact that such claims exist, passed down through 300 years, speaks to the enduring power of the legend. So let's step back and ask the fundamental question: is there really buried gold in Jamaica, or is this just a myth that refuses to die? The honest answer: both. Here's what we know for certain. Jamaica was home to extraordinary wealth in the late 17th century. Port Royal was one of the richest cities per capita anywhere in the world. That wealth came from piracy, trade, and the brutal exploitation of enslaved people on sugar plantations. When Port Royal sank, much of that wealth vanished with it, and archaeology has confirmed that gold and valuable artifacts still exist in the underwater ruins. We also know that pirates did bury treasure. Despite the popular belief that this is purely a fictional trope, historical records document several cases of pirates hiding wealth for later retrieval. It wasn't their primary method of banking, but it happened, especially when pirates needed to hide evidence of their crimes or couldn't safely transport all their plunder at once. And we know that Jamaica's terrain and limited historical record-keeping create perfect conditions for things to stay hidden for centuries. Unlike Europe or even North America, large portions of Jamaica remain relatively unexplored from an archaeological perspective. So yes, it's entirely plausible that buried treasure exists somewhere on the island. But here's the crucial caveat: it almost certainly doesn't exist in the form of a massive pirate horde worthy of a Hollywood movie. The reality is probably much more modest and much more scattered. Instead of one legendary treasure, there are likely dozens or even hundreds of small caches. Individual pirates' emergency funds, merchants' hidden savings, Spanish gold reburied by English privateers. Some of these caches have probably been found over the centuries by farmers, construction workers, or lucky hikers who never reported their discoveries. Others remain buried, their locations lost when the people who hid them died unexpectedly. The earthquake that destroyed Port Royal, the same event that sparked so many treasure legends, also guaranteed that many secrets would stay buried forever. People died without revealing hiding places. Landmarks used to mark locations were destroyed. The very geography of the coastline changed, making old maps useless. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real treasure of Jamaica's buried gold legends isn't the gold itself, but what the legend represents. Think about it. These stories have survived for over 3 centuries. They've been told and retold by generations of Jamaicans, evolving with each telling but never disappearing. They've inspired countless treasure hunts, yes, but they've also inspired something more important: a connection to history. When a Jamaican child hears about Henry Morgan's lost treasure, they're learning about Port Royal, about the earthquake of 1692, about the complex and often dark history of colonialism and piracy that shaped their nation. When a tourist becomes fascinated by these legends, they engage more deeply with Jamaica's past than they might have otherwise. The legends keep history alive in a way that textbooks often fail to do. They make the past feel immediate, tangible, and personally relevant. There's a reason why Port Royal, despite being mostly ruins, remains one of Jamaica's most significant historical sites. The treasure legends ensure that people care about preserving it. And there's something else. These legends embody a very human hope, the possibility of sudden, transformative discovery. The idea that just beneath our feet, or just beyond the next hill, there might be something extraordinary waiting to be found. In a world that often feels completely mapped, completely known, treasure legends remind us that mysteries still exist. So, is Jamaica's buried gold real? In the literal sense, there's no definitive proof of a major undiscovered hoard. But in a deeper sense, the gold is absolutely real. It's real in the historical wealth that once flowed through Port Royal. It's real in the documented treasures that lie beneath the Caribbean Sea. It's real in the possibility, however remote, that somewhere in Jamaica's vast interior, a cache from the age of piracy still awaits discovery. And perhaps most importantly, it's real in the imagination and cultural identity it provides to a nation with a complex and fascinating past. The treasure hunters will continue their searches. Some will find small caches that confirm the legends aren't entirely fantasy. Most will find nothing but the thrill of the hunt. And the legends themselves will continue, passed from generation to generation, evolving but never dying. Because that's the true nature of buried treasure. It's not really about the gold. It's about the search, the mystery, the connection to a past that refuses to be forgotten. Henry Morgan's fortune, if it still exists, has guarded its secret for over 300 years. The earthquake that buried Port Royal created a mystery that may never be fully solved. And perhaps, in the end, that's exactly how it should be. Some mysteries are more valuable unsolved than solved. Some treasures are worth more as legends than as gold bars in a museum display case. Jamaica's buried gold falls into that rare category. Whether it's myth or reality almost doesn't matter. What matters is that people still wonder, still search, still tell the stories. And as long as those stories continue, the treasure will never truly be lost. It will remain exactly where it's always been, buried not in the soil of Jamaica, but in the imagination and heritage of everyone who's ever been captivated by the possibility of hidden gold beneath a Caribbean paradise. The next time you find yourself on Jamaica's shores, looking out at the impossibly blue Caribbean Sea, remember that you're standing at the edge of one of history's great mysteries. Beneath those waves lies the wickedest city on earth. In those hills might rest the fortune of the most famous pirate who ever lived. And in the stories still told in villages and rum shops across the island, the legend of Jamaica's buried gold lives on. So, is it myth or hidden treasure? Maybe the answer is yes, both, and that's what makes it beautiful.